Today I'm going to be talking about everything I've watched in January and February. This video is going to be so long. For January, the first movie I watched was Soul, Disney Pixar's latest film, and it released Christmas Day on Disney+. I really liked the movie's message, and leave it of course to Pixar to always help me right my axis and find my place in the world, because Soul just kind of reminded you that even though there are things that you love in life, those aren't your purpose for being alive. Your passions don't equal your purpose. I think there were some really great jokes in there for adults, especially when they're talking about all the teachers that Soul 22 has had over the years, which was very entertaining. I gave Soul a 3.5 stars, or say like 7 stars out of a 10 scale. That's kind of how I think through my Letterboxd ratings, but it's not gonna be my favorite Pixar movie, so that's kind of where Soul is. Then I rewatched Skyfall, which I rewatched it as a part of watching all of the James Bond movies, and this one was the one I always was like, Skyfall is the best James Bond movie, but I don't really agree, and the reason why is even though Sam Mendes, the director who you probably know most recently from 1917, I could definitely see his influence over it and trying to make more of a singular James Bond film, and I also know Skyfall was celebrating the 50th anniversary of James Bond, and so it had all of those tie-ins to past James Bonds and James Bond films and the mythology of him, but I just personally don't like that it doesn't tie into all the other films the way that even Spectre, which I previously disliked, did. It is still a great movie and it is a fantastic standalone film. I also gave Skyfall 3.5 stars. That's like about a 7 for me. So a great movie, a very enjoyable time, but not my fave. Casino Royale is my fave. Then I watched Wonder Woman 1984, which I gave 2.5 stars. So that's like kind of low for me. Just trying to give you a basis of how I rank these movies. I had heard going into Wonder Woman 1984 that it was terrible, that it was not good, and then I watched it because it was on HBO Max, and I was like, well, I paid 16 bucks a month for this, like I might as well get my money's worth. And I have to say, while overall, yes, the movie, not my favorite. It's nothing compared to the first Wonder Woman. It is better than Aquaman, I will still say that. But the first 45 minutes of that movie are delectable camp. Enthusiastic, intentional camp. The performances of Pedro Pascal, Kristen Wiig, holy cow. I was giddy watching the first third of this movie. I was giddy. I was just so happy. I was like, yes, Patty Jenkins is taking it there. I was genuinely blown away that DC was doing this with a film. The problem is, halfway through the movie, they dropped the camp. The intentionality behind the camp was gone, and so it just got really cheesy, which if you don't know what camp is like when something is intentionally ostentatious, intentionally draws attention to itself, tries to be over the top, flamboyant, extravagant. It's kind of bad, but it's also kind of good at the same time. It works really well, I think, with comic book movies, and I wish this was the direction that DC pushed for more, because let's be honest, they're never going to become Marvel, with Marvel being integrated, being hilarious, family fun. DC either needs to go really dark or they need to stick with camp. And that's, I think, was just the most upsetting part of Wonder Woman 1984 for me. Please, genuinely, if you don't care about the whole movie, just watch that part for sheer entertainment value. This image will eternally be in my mind of the way that Pedro Pascal twists his hand. I'm gonna try to get a clip of it and put it in here, but the way he twists his hand and picks up that wishing stone that they all use in the movie, the way he picks that up, incredible. Next, I watched A Bug's Life, which was actually for school for my sociology class. I gave this 4 stars because Bug's Life is great. It's really underrated. I really love this movie, and I wish it wasn't forgotten as much as it is, because it came out in the early Pixar stages when Toy Story was obviously so above any children's film at that time, and then it was kind of bookended by Monsters Inc. and that sort of thing in the early 2000s, so I just feel like people forget about Bug's Life, but it's wonderful. Getting back to James Bond, watched Spectre, which I actually ended up liking this more than Skyfall. I gave it the same rating of 3.5 stars, but I personally liked it more because after watching Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, I understood all the tie-ins in Spectre, which when I first saw Spectre, I was like, what is this tying into? Although, I don't know what Sam Mendes or the rest of the creative team a part of Spectre had against the bad guy in Quantum of Solace, but like that dude is not mentioned at all. Okay, moving on to February, another movie I watched for one of my classes was this movie called Mickey Mouse Monopoly, Disney, Childhood, and Corporate Power. It's a documentary that came out in 2002. The lowest I can give it on Letterboxd is a 0.5 star. And you go on a little rant about this. I really despise this movie. I get it from a sociological perspective. Disney has a huge corporate influence globally, and I understand that most people don't grow up without a childhood that is at least in some way touched by Disney. But my main problem, and I've had this problem for years, is when people attack Disney because it is, in a way, a monopoly over children's entertainment, and they attack it for not being a million and one things that they want it to be. You can take that from any point of view. You can love something like Disney and still criticize it and be critical about the content they put out, the decisions they make as a company, and that sort of thing. But the frustrating part is that no one who has these opinions ever goes on to make something that they think is an alternative better than Disney, and so they just continue to attack Disney for being the things they want it to be, and that's super frustrating. I also feel like this film, the interviews they picked from kids were they were obviously prompted, or they definitely interviewed more kids for this movie and just picked the ones that fit their narrative against Disney, of little girls being like, oh, well, I wouldn't let the beast yell at me that way, that's not really nice. So that's just to say, documentaries have specific agendas. I need to get off this soapbox, but it just frustrates me because a lot of people just don't, I think, give Disney credit for the things they do and constantly look at the things that they're lacking in from their personal perspective. Next, I watched They Live, which also was for school. This was much better. It's a John Carpenter film, which John Carpenter did the original Halloween, The Thing. I really like this movie. I give it 3.5 stars. It was kind of the concept of a false consciousness, and the idea was there were these, still, I don't know if they're aliens or robots or zombies, but they look like a combination of the three of those things. And the main character is basically trying to figure out that there's actually all these subliminal messages that people are being given through advertising in different media. But I thought it was really interesting, and it was definitely a very satisfying science fiction film, and I think it was a little bit more plot based than a lot of other science fiction films. They Lived kind of picks up as if the world we know today is already sci-fi, and that was super interesting to experience. So I definitely really recommend that one. Frozen 2, again for school, so I did a bunch of movies back to back. I have to say it, Frozen 2 is better than Frozen 1 in my opinion. I think it's a much more mature film. I personally really like the character growth between the first film and the second film. I mean, Sterling K. Brown is in it, who I love. Jonathan Groff is in it, who I love. This was the first time I had watched it since watching the making of Frozen 2 on Disney+. Parts of it I paid way more attention to, and I think the musical aspect of it, the songs, knowing how much work went into figuring out how to tell the story through the musical aspect of the film was so cool and made me appreciate it so much more. I gave Frozen 2 4 stars. Another one for school. I watch a lot of movies for school is what I'm realizing. I watched a movie called Footlight Parade. Footlight Parade came out in 1933, so it's an older film. It's black and white. I only gave this 2.5 stars, which I kind of feel like is pretty low. There were a bunch of musical numbers because what they're trying to do in the film is save opening musical numbers that come before a movie comes out. But it was like a really nice, just older movie, and I definitely don't like when people say they don't like old movies because I'm like, we haven't watched the right old movies. And then I watched the conclusion to the All the Boys I've Loved Before series, Always and Forever, the third one. I gave this 3.5 stars. This was, in my opinion, the best to All the Boys I've Loved Before movie. The emotional level of them has increased with each one, and the topics that they're dealing with kind of increase, and all of them have kind of hit me at a time when I wasn't expecting the message to resonate as much with me, and it did. So in this one, we see Peter and Laura Jean ready to head off to college. It dealt a lot with trying to carve out your own path in life while also having these friends and potential boyfriends or girlfriends from high school that you want to carry into the next chapter of your life, but it's sometimes hard to do that. I will agree with some people's criticism that this one was a lot more montagey than the first one, but this was definitely better than the second one. Then I watched The Little Things, which I've seen twice now, I will admit. Fantastic movie. I want this to win Best Screenplay, Original Screenplay at the Oscars this year. Denzel Washington is a former detective who basically, after having a heart attack and getting a divorce, leaves the LA police force. He heads to Bakersfield, California, where he lives on his own, does like sheriff work, but new murders that are happening in LA County, they seem connected to a past case of his. And so he teams up with Rami Malek, and somewhere along the way of their investigation, they start to look at Jared Leto as a suspect. These three men might be three of the most talented actors in Hollywood. I personally love all of them, and each of their performances in this film is just extremely moving individually, but then together is really great. So I've seen that twice. First time I watched it, I gave it 4 stars. Second time I watched it, also gave it 4 stars. There were several things I picked up on the second time that I didn't see in the first one, which, I mean, happens with any movie, but this one particularly, there were a few things, clues initially that I just kind of missed because I was so deep in the emotion of it, that the details and the little things that I picked up in the second time. And this next one flipped. I watched on recommendation of my boyfriend's little sister, Olivia. Olivia, if you're watching this, I'm sorry to give this movie such a low rating, but I gave it a 2. I had it on the background, and I will say it's a very wholesome movie, and at the end, spoiler alert, but I was like ready for the 2 characters to kiss, and Olivia was like, they're actually 12 years old. That's illegal. It was just cute. It was a nice background movie, and that's why we picked it. So that's why I can't like hate on it too much. But it was just a little too young. Then another one for school, but I have to admit, like every time I watch this movie, I just feel all the Marvel feels again. But I watched The Avengers, which holds up so well. If you haven't watched it since watching Endgame, the gaps that are left in that movie from camera angles or where characters are at certain times, or the jump in time at the end of the movie from, the Battle of New York to then they're all going their separate ways, and then where they are found in like phase 2, all those little gaps are so good and they match up so well with the things that in Avengers Endgame you find out were actually like happening in that same timeline. This movie, I watch it at least once a year, usually more. I love this movie. This was the first Marvel movie I ever saw. It's crazy too how like little you actually have to know prior to seeing The Avengers. If you're only gonna watch one movie from phase 1, like this is the one you need to watch. And this goes straight into my next one, which was Avengers Infinity War. This one also put on as a background, but wow, was this movie good. And I've heard a lot of people make the argument that Avengers Infinity War is a better film than Avengers Endgame. I personally like the conclusiveness of Endgame and the time travel in Endgame and having all the characters back and the final fight scene and stuff, but Avengers Infinity War's pacing is consistently incredible. Obviously the scenes with Wanda and Vision really got me because of WandaVision and those were just really sweet. And then also thinking back that the events of Avengers Infinity War and then WandaVision happen within a few weeks of each other adds a whole nother level for why all the stuff that goes on in WandaVision happens. That is all the movies that I saw in January and February, and now we're gonna talk about all the shows, which I will probably go through a little bit faster. First off, we'll just get it out of the way. WandaVision. If you haven't been watching WandaVision, what have you been doing? They're all out now, all 9 episodes. You have to go binge it. If you were let down by WandaVision, I personally feel give it a break. Watch all of Falcon and Winter Soldier, watch all of Loki, and wait until you've got a good dose of Marvel content, and maybe take some of the pressure that you're putting on WandaVision for being the first thing in a year off of it, and then relook at it as a series, and then tell me if your view of it initially is the same as later. Next, Bridgerton. Again, have talked about this at length before. What a great show. I cannot wait for season 2. I believe production is starting soon on season 2. Dickinson. Season 2 of Dickinson released at the beginning of January, and it's finished airing now, so it's all out, but I've been kind of slow to get back to it. And this kind of connects to Game of Thrones, which I've also started watching, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But Sir Loras in Game of Thrones is Sam in season 2 of Dickinson, and that's just kind of blowing my mind, because when I started watching Game of Thrones, I was like, who's that? I recognize him. I realized after watching an episode of Dickinson again, that's Sam. So anyways, I think Dickinson is such a great, like, ahistorical show, but I've talked about this before. And then, like I said, I've been watching Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was one of those shows before that I was like, I'm not watching it. All 8 seasons had come out by the time I was probably at the age where I could be watching Game of Thrones, but holy cow, is it a good show. Binging it, there's a lot of storylines where I'm like, okay, come on, let's get going. I'm tired of this, because at an hour long episode, that's a lot to binge. The specific storylines, like, I am the biggest Daenerys fan. I love her. I just kind of wait for her story to pop back up. What's great is that having such strong characters and basing your show around characters that people either really love or love to hate, it's okay if someone's story dips a little bit. So they had that built-in protection, which as somebody who wants to make shows like this someday, that is a super important lesson to learn. My other favorite lately has been How to Get Away with Murder. So after Bridgerton, I need to watch more Shondaland. Viola Davis is fantastic. And I want to be one of the kids in Annalise Keating's classes that never gets called on. Like, I don't need to be like the special kids who are like helping her solve everything. Although she'd probably be a really scary professor, so maybe I take that back. Next, I watch Hollywood, which again I've talked about, but for anyone that, again, ahistorical like period pieces are my jam. So I think Hollywood is great, but if you're also just a fan of movies, or honestly it'd be a really great thing to binge right now when we're not really getting real award shows. Hollywood culminates at an Academy Award ceremony, and so I think that would be a really fun thing to watch. Now I really want to rewatch it. There's too much to watch, I can't rewatch it. Okay, next, and I'm really only one episode into this, but Umbrella Academy. I really love the character of number 5. I really like him. I'm excited to talk more about Umbrella Academy in the future as I watch more of it. And then I've been watching a lot of Friends lately. Friends is just a great show. Do I really need to recommend Friends to you? No. Then I watched an episode of Veep, which Julia Louis-Dreyfus is, I love her. I really want to get deeper in the show. It's very irreverent. Then obviously I've talked about this. I've been watching This Is Us, consistently my favorite show on air. Then 30 Rock. I have been watching 30 Rock for officially a year now. I've been watching 30 Rock. I usually am not the type to savor a TV show, but with 30 Rock, I definitely will now go a few weeks or a month or something without watching an episode just because I don't want it to end. And then finally, I finished Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which was my first, I don't want to say first binge show, but it was one of the first shows I ever turned on and just like had in the background. But then inevitably with most shows that I do that with, I end up becoming really invested in them. They become the show I actually watch. And then with Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, the finale being the interactive movie type thing. When I was still home for Christmas break, I finally just sat down and did it. And it was really fun, and it was pretty fast actually. I think it was probably only like an hour to an hour and 30 minutes that it took me to get through it. And I just really like it. And I really like Kimmy Schmidt. And kind of like what I talked about with Ted Lasso, Kimmy Schmidt is just the kind of person, she sees the good in the world and makes you want to be a little bit of a better person. I love shows like that. My voice is getting disgustingly hoarse, and I have finally gone through everything I watched in January and February. I will make a video for March. Thank you so much for sitting and listening to me talk for what will probably be like 15 minutes once I edit this all down. I really love just talking about movies and TV shows, so thank you for watching. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. You don't have to, again, it's a free country. And feel free to subscribe if you want more content like this with show recommendations, movie ratings, and just kind of talking about the sort of stuff that I like to watch. With that being said, have a great day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.